Hello, my name is Frank Krimkowski from Our Revolution Helena. This is a program that we've had here on Helena Civic TV for the past couple of years. And today our program is going to be focusing in on affordable housing and homelessness issues in the Helena area. The origin of this program is that at the Our Revolution Helena meeting of January 9th, we started talking about homelessness and affordable housing in Helena. And we said we ought to really get down, bring in some really knowledgeable people on this issue. And I said, I'm sure we can do a Helena Civic TV program. And so today, I've got some very knowledgeable guests who are here to talk about this topic with us in Our Revolution Helena. We have Missy Polk, who's a working mother with 4 children who's been dealing with homelessness and is awaiting housing openings at this very moment. We have Michael O'Neill, who's the Helena Housing Authority Executive Director. We have Emily McVeigh, who's the Executive Director of the United Way of the Lewis and Clark County area. And the United Way is a lead participant in a program called Housing First, and we'll learn more about that. We have Sherry Downey, who's the Deputy Director of the Homelessness and Housing Resources Network of a national organization as part of HHS, Health and Human Services. And she's an expert on affordable housing and homelessness, and is the former head of the Montana Homeless Coalition. And Nolan Lister, who is a reporter for the Independent Record on local government and crime reporter issues. And he's recently done some articles on affordable housing and homelessness. So this is a big topic. Our revolution has taken on some big topics because our revolution sounds like we're not just interested in fiddling around with the edge of things, but getting down to economic justice, getting down to the root of issues. Mm-hmm. And so what I want to do is ask our guests some questions and see what they can lead us into a dialogue on this very important issue. First, I want to ask Nolan Lister from the Independent Record, who has written some articles recently about some of the things that led him to do those stories and what he found that was either interesting or shocking or thought very important.
Yeah, so this is an issue that faces just about every community in the country, and a lot of people, a lot of municipalities don't really know what to do with it. A lot of municipalities kind of throw up their hands and say, well, we'll leave it to the nonprofits. But it seems like the city government here in Helena is doing a lot to be proactive in this. They've approved a number of different amendments to city ordinances, allowing for taller buildings to be constructed. They've been identifying surplus, what they call surplus property or underutilized property that the city owns. They hope to perhaps sell some of those in the near future to organizations like Habitat for Humanity, for example, for the purpose of building affordable housing there. And so they're doing a number of things. They're kind of trying to be as creative and proactive as possible with some of the policies they are enacting here, and so it's kind of refreshing to see that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I've been working. I haven't been working at all for the last 8 years, almost 9 years now. But I did work for the Community Development Block Grant Program of the Department of Commerce and had a lot of contact with communities across the state where our program helped them to build housing for low-income people or to help low-income people get housing rehab, to get windows fixed and things like this. And so I know there are lots of things that are happening in terms of local government, state government, federal government. But I also remember being shocked when I read a few years ago that ever since 1948, when the federal government has been gathering statistics on homelessness and housing shortages, there's been a housing shortage. So we're talking about almost 80 years worth of housing shortages. Now, Emily McVeigh from United Way, why don't you tell us a little bit about what United Way's involvement is in housing issues and what's been going on there?
Okay. Yeah, we house the Housing First program, and under that are many layers of working on homelessness and housing instability. Primarily, the goal of Housing First is to house somebody first. We know that having homeless people in our community or instably housed people in our community actually costs us a lot more money than it does if we get them housed. There's lots of statistics from other states and Housing First organizations that have shown this. What that number looks like in Helena, we don't quite have yet, but we know that they're cutting costs, in the tune of $50,000 a person per year just by providing housing and support services rather than having people use emergency rooms and jails or EMTs for connection. Lots of services that they use to remain stable enough to get through the day that they won't use if they're housed and they have those other ongoing support networks. So our goal is to get that program built up. Right now we have a half-time person running that program. We did just write a grant with the Good Samaritan Ministries, and the city and the county are co-funding a new position called the Housing Navigator. So that person just started a couple of weeks ago. She's seeing her first clients next week. That's a huge improvement where if somebody is in the community and they need help finding housing or staying housed, she can help with that piece. That's a piece we haven't had before in a case management style position. Also, Good Samaritan receives funding sources that can help people with utilities or rental assistance. If they're going to be evicted, a lot of times that causes crisis for a person, and then they don't have the skills to communicate with their landlord effectively to stay housed. They're in panic mode. They're worried about losing their housing. So that Housing Navigator will also be able to help them have that communication with their landlord to help keep them housed. The other piece she'll do is to find all the landlords and the real estate owners in the community and bring them together to understand the housing shortage issue and why they should take Section 8 vouchers from Michael's staff and all those kinds of things. So that's a huge piece. But in the United Way, when we do the Housing First piece, we bring together between 15 and 30 community agencies every Wednesday that staff the homeless. We call it the homeless list, or it's the information kept in the Housing Management Information System computer program, HIMIS. So they go through that every week, and sometimes that has 80 people and sometimes it has 200 people on the list. And those people need housing and they need a variety of services. We can provide the referrals to all the services that they need, but we don't have the housing for them. There is a shortage of housing in the Lewis and Clark area. The last, some of the statistics I was reading, and I just went to the economy seminar this week, Lewis and Clark County has one of the lowest open housing rates in the state of Montana. So when you go to look for housing, it just isn't available. So that's something we're always communicating with other agencies on how to work on. So that's, the answer is housing first, but we don't have that answer. So building more affordable housing is really one of the biggest steps we need to
Yes,
take.
I recall reading in the November 2018 Tri-County housing assessments that the vacancy rate is 2%. And
The last I read was 1%,
1%.
so it was better then.
That was getting worse.
Yeah.
So, but is there enough, even if we had everybody that you could get linked up with the Section 8 housing, are there enough Section 8 housing vouchers for all those people? And I say that because when I was working for the Department of Public Health and Human Services in a previous life, I was managing the child care program, child care subsidies for people, for women and families who needed it. And we only had, even if we gave all of our money, we only had enough money for 10% of the eligible mothers and families. So that, and in foster care, there was always money for foster care, but no money for family-based services to help kids and their families get over the rough spots so they don't have to go into foster care. So that it's a real question about whether or not what we need to do about getting you more money and more housing in Helena so that you can link those people up successfully.
Yeah, and Michael would know much more about the
Sure.
availability of the Section 8 vouchers. The stats on the economy seminar showed that Lewis and Clark County is the second best community in the Montana, though, for the number of housing units available, where we have 73 per 100 homeless people. So we're the second rated in the state. So that's good. I mean, it just means that we have 27 people that wouldn't have housing, but to be second is good. We could, it'd be great if we were number one, and if that was 100 for 100, but.
Well, the fact of the matter is that our housing systems that serve very low income and low income folks and homeless persons, very limited resources. And it's estimated that probably only about 1 in 3 households that need assistance are able to gain it. And so all the programs we're going to talk about for the most part have lengthy waiting lists. That being said, it's very important that people stay on the wait list and maintain their place by, often when people are homeless, they may be moving, they may change their address, but they need to maintain their contact info. So when they do come up in the list, they can obtain housing. A waiting list never gets any shorter if you're not on it, is kind of the mantra we say at the Housing Authority. But it is unfortunate that, people, who do all the right things and follow through on their wait list, it may be 16 months before they're able to get some assistance. So different individuals and families will, I think we'll hear today about what folks do to get by. They may be couch surfing, they may be doubling up with family members, they may be living in their vehicle or out in the national forests and things. So all these things we see. In the middle of winter, I think we have a hard time believing that folks are out throughout the 4 seasons homeless in our community, but that's very true.
Now, when you mentioned the colder temperatures, I was looking back at an article that appeared last year in the Independent Record by Tom Plank. It was about the days when it was 20 below zero. And it used to be 20 below zero in Helena for a couple of weeks every February, but last February it was as well. So he wrote an article about how many more people are coming into God's Love Shelter and this and that. And I found that very interesting, but I also found very appalling some of the comments that I found on the comments section. One of them, and I won't mention who this is because this guy probably will get death threats if he knows I've listed his name. He said, "Unfortunately, we still have gullible Helena residents foolishly giving panhandlers money. The homeless get 3 hot meals a day at the shelter as well as overnight stay and clothing and toiletries and other things. So don't be fooled by these 'I'm hungry' panhandling signs. Well, they just want dollars for their cigarettes and beer. Be smart, not gullible, and donate to local charities rather than giving to your panhandlers." It's an attitude of misunderstanding of the extent of real homeless people. And I've known real homeless people, and I know I've helped a few myself, and I know people who've helped people regularly. But people find out that their current housing is infested with mold, and they've got to get out of it. Well, easier said than done because you have to go to someplace. So if you find a Section 8 voucher, which just one person did, yeah, you got it. Great. But now you got to have a phone to call up these different places. This person's phone was broken. So a friend bought him a phone. And then he said, okay, but the problem is my car is broken. Another friend of mine, who's anonymous as well, said, I have a car. And so that person was a success story in getting into another place. But not everybody has a person who says, I'll get you a phone. And that happened to be Mayor Wilmot Collins, who just said, meet me this afternoon. I've got a phone for you. And he just bought it out of his own money. So that the real homeless people, are not reflected at all by this fellow in the comment in the February 2019 Independent Record.
No, because it's usually with limited resources. When individuals have limited resources or no resources, it's not just the one thing. I mean, housing, I think, is fundamental. If you can get into housing, you can put things back together again, but you identify there's all kinds of barriers, transportation being a big one, just the ability to follow through, just over, what doesn't seem like a necessarily arduous process, but, you need to have identification, a photo ID, you need to have a social security card, and if you've lost those things and you're not in a place where you can organize your life in a way that you can get them, that can become a barrier to getting people in. But it's that having enough money just to get through the process sometimes, or so having natural supports and friends like what you're describing, and community members providing that boost, and this like the housing navigator is a big position. Our social service systems need to get back to old ways. We've lost in the recent years almost completely the network of case managers that used to play a critical role providing housing navigation type services for people with disabilities, particularly with serious disabling mental illness, helping them obtain housing and stay in housing. And we see that change in the system every day in our programs. Folks that I've known for a long time in the mental health system who are now without any support. And when they run into problems, it's very complicates their ability to stay in housing because there's no one to help them figure that out.
Yeah. And one thing that I would add is when we start to talk about problems that other people have, you're making a really clear division between us and them. And it makes it safer to say we don't need to help. Somebody else can take care of that. I just want to tag on to what Emily was saying a little bit about Housing First, or permanent supportive housing, which is an evidence-based practice manualized by SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that has proved through the evidence over the many years that it really works. What it isn't is housing only. It isn't housing for people who just need housing. It's housing for people who have serious mental illnesses or serious mental illness and co-occurring substance use disorders. And it has 7 key elements. What we know is that if you follow the practice as written, bringing it to fidelity, it works. People who are coming out of chronic homelessness, which means they have a serious disability, and they've been homeless for at least a year, or 3 times in the last 4 years. 77% of those folks with alcohol use disorders were still stably housed in 2 years. 97% of chronically homeless adults with mental illness and alcohol use disorders were stably housed after a year, and 84% after 2 years. These are the hardest people to house. They're the most vulnerable people among us. So this is an important practice. It's a nuanced and complicated practice, and I just wanted to stress that Housing First is really never housing only. It really needs to be coupled with voluntary commitment to services. And so the person that gets a Housing First voucher has a standard lease, the same lease I would have or you would have. But oftentimes, without the services that come in to support a person, they'll spin right out of the housing and get evicted because they'll violate the lease. So that can be a great connection point with someone who's ready to spin out of housing to say, this isn't working out so well for you. Maybe we could bring some services in to help. So I am so excited about Helena. I get to sit on the Helena Housing Authority board with Michael, and I can say, and the Social Services Committee for Helena and Lewis and Clark County, and I will say, Helena is a fabulous place that is really working hard to make a difference for people who are the most vulnerable in our community.
I think Sherry mentions that we talked earlier about the recent efforts the city has taken. It's important to note that the county, Lewis and Clark County, has had a long commitment. It's the only county that maintains funding for homeless and indigent folks with about $500,000 a year to provide funding for basic services, housing, emergency shelter, health care, that provides a little bit of funding to the network of homeless providers in our community, in addition to significant multi-million dollars worth of general fund that they put into the mental health system to try to address needs. But so from local government perspective, they are taking steps and have had a long commitment to solving these things. The problems are just of a scale that really requires doing some, one thing we don't have in Montana, unlike most states, is that we have no state general fund that addresses affordable housing needs. We do provide a significant $80 or $90 million a year subsidy to higher income housing through things like mortgage interest tax deduction, but most states have funds of some sort that are able to match some of the federal resources. We've been working on that for a long time. We think perhaps in the next session we can get there, where we create some Montana resources that will leverage additional federal dollars that will address just the basic issue of supply of affordable housing.
So we've got this idea that there is a more holistic approach toward this, housing first and other services, and what you call the evidence-based program. That reminds me of a similar thing that I think I mentioned before, is that there is evidence from the best social workers that I used to know in Montana that 95% of the kids who go into foster care don't need to go into foster care. What they need are family-based services. And there are family-based services. It is an evidence-based practice saying instead of putting millions of dollars into foster care, which is a runaway train, it has been for decades.
And leads to homelessness.
And leads to homelessness. And foster, just a study that came out just yesterday about kids in foster care having less well-paying jobs, less education, and so forth. But there was a thing, and there is a thing called family-based services. It's evidence-based. You take a social worker, instead of jerking the kids out of the home, you put the social worker into the home. It's voluntary. But
We've
works.
seen a reduction in that type of services as well in recent years, which is unfortunate. Montana actually had some very innovative wraparound family services, not only in the Helena community but statewide. I think due to, 2 sessions ago, reductions in state funding.
Absolutely.
A lot of that was lost and it hasn't been rebuilt. It takes years to build capacity, and so we'd like to see that. I think you're absolutely right that families sometimes get missed in the equation of homelessness, and that the role that systems play in fragmenting families. And so if we can keep families together, long-term outcomes for everyone in that household can do so much better.
Well, this is a really large topic. But as Michael was saying here, we talk about the 2015 and 2017 legislatures, cut back on services, on case management services, and there was some fight to get some of that back. But I'm older than all of you. I can remember back in 1994 when there was a constitutional referendum in Montana. And what it did was to say, let's change Article 9, Section 3 of the Constitution, change one word in it. The Constitution from 1789 through 1994 read, the state shall provide assistance to persons who, by reason of adversity, are in need of services from the state. And so the Butte Community Union and lots of low-income groups use that provision in the Constitution to say the legislature can't pull this off. Now, that went on the ballot. Judge Gordon Bennett, used to be my next-door neighbor and good friend, said he was asked to throw that off the ballot. And he said, and I quote, the language is utterly deceptive because you can't just say, as the language of the initiative said, we're going to give the legislature a little more authority. What it did was we're taking a right away from the people to assistance from the state. And so there are lots of things to backtrack on. 1994, we haven't had the legal right to challenge some of these things and backward actions by it's been the Republican-dominated legislature. So we've gotten some really good, interesting perspectives. Let's take a listen now to Missy Polk, who has been much more closely involved in these issues than all of us.
Well, I personally feel like homelessness is a huge issue, and it also does have an impact on people with their mental health and things of the sort. And me personally, having 4 kids and being a victim of domestic violence who's ended up homeless, it is really, really hard. It is not easy at all. And the comment that person made, I've actually had to go stand out by the interstate with a sign and ask people for help. And I work full time. I mean, I'm an assistant manager. I work full time, and I still need help. And I didn't receive any. I just received a lot of glances and stares, and I ended up crying and just walking away. I mean, it was horrible. It was a really bad experience for me, and I don't want to have to do it again. So people who stand out there with those signs, actually, I give them a lot of credit because it is not an easy thing to ask people for help like that. And for me personally, I like camping. I love camping, but when it's your only choice, it's not as fun. It's, and especially sleeping behind a steering wheel and then having to go to work the next day, it really, really makes it hard, especially with the job that I do. It's not, there's a lot of manual labor, a lot of unpacking boxes, a lot of doing things. So, it's kind of like, it'd be best to lay in a bed and have a good night's rest and not have to worry about it. But I am thankful that I've gotten into the Friendship Center. That is a wonderful place. Very, very helpful. And I am now currently waiting for availability on housing. So, we're almost there. And I do believe that there are programs out there, but I didn't feel any of them were conducive for my family. Like the, what is that one? Salvation Army transitional program. I didn't feel that was conducive for my family. There's the Family Promises. I didn't feel that was conducive for my family either. Just because you move week to week back and forth, I didn't, I have 4 kids who are 14, 11, 10, and 8. Moving them back and forth from church to church, week to week, that is not conducive for my family. The security that children need, they need consistency, they need boundaries, they need security, they need all those things. And I feel like we're products of our environment. And with my kids, housing is a key factor in that. And I want them to have steady, stable housing. And I've been working really, really hard. And, I personally, it's just been an uphill battle and it's a struggle. But I feel like the closer that we get, the better things will eventually be for my family. Because, it's hard. It's really hard. And I give people a lot of credit. And there's also another issue that I've been wanting to bring up, which is I want to see if we can all come together and put together a benefit fundraiser for victims of domestic violence who end up homeless. Like I was saying prior, I know it's a big issue. I know homelessness is a huge issue for a lot of people, and not all of those people are victims of domestic violence. But I personally feel like a person who ends up fleeing violence and then ends up homeless, that's like insult to injury. It makes it harder. And especially because, like what you were talking about with people who have substance abuse problems, I think it's great that they help people with that. But see, when I was still living in Colorado, I was seeking housing because I'd been in a domestic violence shelter there as well. And they said, yeah, we have housing. And I said, oh, that's great. Oh, but do you have a substance abuse problem? Well, no, I don't. I don't even smoke cigarettes anymore. I quit smoking. I don't do drugs. I don't drink, nothing. And for them to say, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you unless you have a substance abuse problem. I can't help you. I'm sorry. That is very discouraging to a person because it's like, I have 4 kids and it's cold in Colorado too. It gets pretty cold there. And to say, well, I don't know what to tell you, and I'm like, well, I'm in pending homelessness. Is there anything you can do? Nope, can't help you. And then here, I've gone to several different places, and it seems like everywhere I've gone, it's just a dead end, roadblock, dead end, roadblock. It doesn't seem like there's much help. Now, with the Housing Authority, I signed up for housing in September of 2018, and I'm just now getting to where I'm going to be in housing. So that is quite some time, because I've been here since August of 2018. So, and it's hard, and getting by in between. I've had friends who have helped me out. Thankfully, but I don't have any family here. I'm an orphan. I don't have parents. I don't have any resources. I don't have anybody that can just step up and be like, oh, I can help you. It's just, and I have a lot of people who say, I wish I could help you, but because there's 5 of us. I don't know too many people that can house me and 4 children. It just isn't a realistic thing, you know, and so we've just had to kind of get by and do what we can with what we've got, and it's had a huge impact on my children. It's really hard for them. It's extremely hard for them. And I mean, my oldest son has struggled really hard, and he actually got out of the hospital not too long ago. He was in the hospital for 3 months because it's hard. It takes a toll on them. And it's, you know, and we've never been homeless before. This is the first time we've ever experienced homelessness. And it's just, it tears me apart to watch my kids and to watch them, you know, struggle the way that they do because we don't have a consistent home. So I don't know what else to really say about it.
So I guess you don't fit into this comment that was another one in the independent record by one of these people who apparently doesn't know much. He says, shut down the shelters and they'll all go back to Washington, California, Oregon, Arizona, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
No, and I'm thinking is, you know, Missy, you're a victim of domestic violence, and I was thinking I've got to ask Nolan just a question because I read in the Helena Independent Record paper every day for the last year or so, a series of articles saying this man has choked his partner, or he's raped her, or suffocated her, killed her, etc. It seems like that is a daily staple. What's going on with men that they're doing all this domestic violence? And how is it to be putting these things in the paper every day?
Well, that is tough. But I think I've read recently that you know, this time of year, like around winter, around the holidays, is an especially bad time for those types of cases. But that this year, during that time span, those domestic violence cases, intimate partner or family assault, things like that, that this year during that time span, those numbers have gone down. I wouldn't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but whatever they're doing seems to be putting at least some of a dent in that issue.
So I would just like to say I'm sorry for your experience. I'm sorry what you've been through. I'll also say that funders of programs have a great deal to say about who is served. So I would suspect in the case where you were told we can't help you unless you have this problem or that problem, you were at the wrong program, because there are lots of programs designed specifically to help people who are in the situation that you're in. Mm-hmm. I would say there are very few, if any, that I'm aware of that are specifically designed to just provide housing for people with substance use disorders. At least with this evidence-based practice, somebody also has to have a serious mental illness, and it really is a very small cohort of people that this practice is designed for. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to clarify that. I don't think...
Yeah, that was not here. That was in Colorado.
Right.
Ever since I've moved here, I haven't heard things like that, so I don't know what was going on with that.
One of the things at the Helena Housing Authority, again, we have long waiting lists, but we were the only housing authority in the state that has adopted certain preferences to identify and target folks, and families that are homeless is one of those targeted things. It doesn't mean that there isn't still a too long of a wait, but it means that you can move a little more quickly through the waiting list process, and so I think that's really important. Ideally, you know, in the Housing First model, it'd be ideal if we would have access to readily available when, you know, if you could, you know, you talk about the impact to your families, to your kids, and those are long-term impacts, and I think getting stabilized in housing, the kids have resiliency, and that they'll get their feet under their ground, and that's why it's great to get people in housing. But wouldn't it be fantastic if when, you know, you run into a situation, you become homeless, that we'd keep that period just brief, very short, mm-hmm. for it to go on for, you know, a year or longer. Just, you know, no one could put up with that kind of amount of stress, yeah, and things, and so that's a big challenge that we have. And so Housing First, in certain instances, mm-hmm. we're targeting folks, and we may have the resource to provide a voucher or something, but sometimes we're lacking the service support that, just the search for housing and finding housing in a historically tight housing market when there's the supply of any housing is under 1% it's a challenge.
I think it's an important distinction to make there that the obviously the most vulnerable of our communities are hit the hardest with anything like this, but even up to income levels like around 120% of the area median income are still, those people are having trouble finding housing, and it's across the board. And the city, it affects everything, right? So the city can't hire talented people to come to town to work for them because they can't find a place to live. So they'll go find a job elsewhere. You can't keep, the restaurant can't keep servers is staffed because they have to leave town because they can't afford their rent any longer. So it's not just the mentally ill, those with chemical dependencies, it's the folks working full-time jobs with kids who are also still having a problem, and there's very little services, I think, to help those people.
When the cost of housing is going up, the last thing I read was it would take $17.50 an hour to afford a house in Helena. The average wage is $11.15.
Right.
So clearly
to
we're
afford
in
rent of a house that they're buying.
Actually, minimum wage is
Somebody
like
asked me a similar
$9.35.
question the other day about why don't people just go where it's warm if they're homeless? Why do they stay here where it's cold? Well, because this is their home.
This is home.
And a lot of the people we talk to would never call themselves homeless.
Right.
Because Helena is their home. So we try to get away from saying that as much as we can. And we talk about housing unstable or people that are experiencing eviction, or a lot of different ways that we try to refer to that, because people that are homeless that are from Helena, Montana, or even from Montana at all would not say they're homeless. This is their home. This is where their families are, their friends, their networks. They may have some reason generally related to chemical dependency or mental health issues that are preventing them from living with those support networks, but this is their home. This is where they belong. And so for somebody to say they should go somewhere else is really saying, they shouldn't be at home.
Right. And there's no place left in the country where you can rent a modest apartment by working full-time at minimum wage. There's no place left in the country. Poverty, I think, is one of the root causes that we don't talk about as much as we should. I think we all know people with serious mental illnesses who are still housed, or people who have a drinking problem and they're still housed. But if you throw poverty into the mix, that's when the dominoes start to fall.
Well, I was going to say, I tell you that I was given an article by Gloria O'Rourke, who's the executive director of the Montana Economic Development Association. She's from Anaconda, great lady. And this article that she sent over was an article that has a story about Rockford, Illinois. And I just read the brief of it because you might say, let's go to Rockford. This city has a plan to stop homelessness by the end of the year. Rockford, Illinois should house its last homeless resident by the end of the year 2020. Using a program of treating each homeless person as their own unique case with unique solutions. Less than a decade ago, more than 700 people were homeless in the small 150,000 person, that's the biggest town in Montana, Billings 100,000. The small 150,000 person city of Rockford, Illinois, about 90 miles northwest of Chicago. By the end of the year, the city expects that number will have shrunk to essentially zero, making it the first community in the U.S. to end homelessness. And I need to give them a big shout out for coming up with this thing. But how far away are we from that?
Well, one of the things we're currently involved in right now is what's called is a project at the United Way and Helena Housing Authority and St. Peter's Health, along with a whole variety of community partners. It's a data project really of gathering. It's called Housing as Healthcare, and it's under the big rubric of what's called FUSE projects, for frequent users of systems engagement. And what it is, we're gathering data from various systems to identify those folks who are homeless, who may be without housing or unstably housed, who are also frequently in community systems. They may be emergency services, they may be at the emergency room, maybe interactions with law enforcement and other systems. And what we are finding, and we're still with our preliminary results, but for folks, certain individuals, and it's really important for us to understand that our current status quo of where we're saying we don't have the resources to provide housing, that actually is costing us as communities much more than if we would just address the housing crisis that we have in front of us. In some cases, $50,000 or $100,000 and higher per person. That's the cost in the community for homeless, for that individual person being homeless or that family being homeless, and just the long-term effects as well aren't even calculated in that. So we can do things differently, do things more effectively for the person served and the family served, but also at a much more cost-effective way. I think sometimes you've been reading some of these comments, I think are attitudinally, we kind of have a knee-jerk reaction that lots of folks get help with their housing. You get a mortgage interest deduction or capital gains when you sell your house, you don't pay taxes on it. That's all great benefit. It stabilizes the housing market and all that. You don't have to stand in line for that benefit. But in the case of very low income folks, historically, up through 1981, we were, and it's kind of reflected in our own housing stock here in Helena, that was the high water mark of providing housing support for particularly low and very low income Americans, including here in Helena. And they estimate that if we had the same level of funding addressing those needs today, adjusted for inflation, that we'd have 3 times the resources than we do today. And that's part of the problem, that there were some major decisions made in 1981-82 that really made drastic cuts to assistance to low-income Americans, not only just in housing, but in job training and other types of empowerment programs. And we've never really quite recovered from that. And then there was just a general shifting of resources to still folks who are struggling for housing, but at higher incomes, more at 60% of median, rather than folks that are really struggling at 0 to 30% of median. And most of the bulk of about 80% of the folks we serve are living well below 30% of median income. And in fact, over a third of the households that come into our programs when they become housed are homeless at the time they enter our programs. That's a significant number. I think that's a shocking number. And so if we could shorten the time, that if people struggle with housing, that they can get into housing, it just makes such an importance to a family, like Missy's experience, or for individuals. And as important, it's less costly. It's like we're doing things that just, it doesn't add up.
Well, this has been a great discussion for me. I want to give everyone a chance to say whatever else you'd like to say, but as I'm thinking back here, I'm remembering that one of the persons who had talked about this family-based services program, saying it's much better than foster care. It works. We can save families, keep people together. The biggest trauma for kids is being ripped out of their families, not being in foster care or being beaten up by the mom and dad. And so, but one of this fellow who's from the University of Florida came to a conference back in 1988. Shows how we've got to catch up with the insights from those days. She said, what we need, for example, in both criminal justice and in the prisons and elsewhere, is that you should think of it this way. He said, what if your brother or sister were in that situation? What would you do? Well, so that's the way to look at it. And of course, he's echoing just a thing from 2,000 years ago. I'm not sure how many of you have recently read Plato's Republic. But I used to teach philosophy and read the Republic when I was in school. And I recall that at the middle, exact center of that book, Socrates is given the words. He says, what do we need to get to a society in which justice exists? Everybody gets what they deserve, justice. And Socrates says, well, we're going to have to tell one big lie. And what was the lie? That all people are brothers and sisters. That's in Plato's Republic from 2,000 years ago, and he was onto it at that time. We are all our brothers and sisters, and we can't let this issue go because a lot of our brothers and sisters don't have enough funding to afford rent even if they have a job, or there's not enough money to build enough houses of affordable age, not age range, but rent range to be able to get in. You were going to say something?
No, I just think this is a complicated conversation, and it's a nuanced conversation because there's so many layers. You know, there's people with all kinds of problems that we could name, you know, dozens and dozens of problems, and I've spent a lot of years talking about and to people experiencing homelessness, and I will say there are no two stories that are the same, and there are no two happy stories. There are some happy endings, but I just think we need to give credit to Helena and Lewis and Clark County for the many efforts they're making to solve this problem. And, you know, I would be interested to see what Emily has to say about the way you're implementing Housing First. I would suspect that it's a little broader than the evidence-based practice with more people, more kinds of problems.
Right now, it's primarily the support piece because the housing piece is missing. So we're trying to bring anybody who works with people to the table.
Nice.
Because if you need a parenting class, or if you need mental health services, or if you need food, or whatever it is in between all those things, we're trying to bring all those people to the table so we can provide that support piece while we're waiting to try to find the housing. Of course, we're referring to the Family Promise and the Salvation Armies and the God's Love and everybody. But yeah, for now, especially because we're very limited in staff, and we're doing what we can to make it work in our creative way and making it work for Helena specifically. So, you know,
I love that.
We'll build it up. That's our goal.
I would just clarify this, that it's the shortage of housing, the resource, because it's that wait.
There's no physical house to put a person in.
They go on a waiting list. And even for many people, certain individuals who chronically homeless with co-occurring disabling conditions may be able to provide a voucher, but the way the service system currently is, they don't really have that support to do the maneuvering to place it. And so that's always frustrating when we have vouchers out there and we know that people are just kind of not able to kind of have the support they need to get it done. I think there's positive signs. I think we have new housing coming online, the Red Alder project, RMDC, the Serendipity project that's being refurbished, the work we'll be doing at the Housing Authority in terms of preserving our existing housing stock, but being able to add on to the supply, that this is all part of a single solution. I think we'll have some new partnerships that will come out of the Fuse project that I talked about earlier. We're trying to make clear that there has to be a strong link between affordable permanent housing and support service networks, and that we can do that. It may be some new facilities, but a lot of it is using our existing housing stock and bringing services into those settings, so that you know, not only for folks who are struggling with mental illness or substance abuse, but things like the aging of our population, that we have, you know, we can help people maintain their dignity and independence longer into their life in a regular housing setting with just a little bit of services instead of high-cost nursing home care or being hospitalized. You know, we can do things differently that's lower cost and in the end provides a higher quality of life. It's just we have to kind of get out of our boxes and be willing to do it.
Okay. I want to give Nolan and then Missy a chance to some final remarks, and then I'll end up.
Yeah, I think, you know, you mentioned that Illinois community and asked where Helena is compared to them, and we're far from eliminating homelessness in our community, but it seems like the groundwork is being laid. You know, he mentioned a number of developments that are coming online soon. The City Commission also approved a measure to waive fees associated with developing affordable housing projects, which can save some of these groups like Habitat for Humanity thousands of dollars up front, which is a huge benefit to them. And so I think we're taking the right steps. It looks like it. Now, getting the resources and following through on all that, that's another story, but I think Helena's moving in the right direction.
I think if our wages go up, our housing supply is a place like Rockford, it's probably a little more affordable in terms of the housing stock too.
Well, and that's another thing that I've had an issue with. I mean, I only get paid $11 an hour doing what I'm doing, and trying to find a place to live that's not under affordable housing for that income, it's impossible. There is nothing. I can't afford it, especially with as many children as I have. I don't receive child support. I'm a single parent. I don't have, like I said, those supports. So it does make it extremely difficult. And being homeless for almost a year has been really rough. But at the same time, from where I was to where I am now, like in Colorado to here, I have received much more help in this county than I did in the county that I used to live in. Like, I've heard a lot of like not so good things about Helena, but I've always had a really good experience with everything that I've dealt with in Helena. There are a lot of nice people here. I really, really like it here. It may be very, very cold. Not too fond of that, but you know, otherwise, I really like Helena. It's a very nice place to live. And there's a lot of very helpful people. Like, I've had help from the church. I've had help from another church that I don't even attend. I mean, people have come, and I've even, in turn, when I even wasn't able to, have helped other people, because I know what it's like to be in that position. You know, I've had people come through my line at work, and they just don't have enough money to buy what they're needing, you know, and I know that they need those items. It's a necessity. So even though I really can't afford it, I'll step up and I'll help them out. And I personally believe that God is a huge factor in all of this. And I know everybody's entitled to their own beliefs and to their own everything like that. But for me personally, that's how I feel about it. And if it hadn't been for the church, because Frank and I go to the same church, they're amazing. They're amazing people. They've been extremely helpful to my family. The other church is the, I can't think of the name offhand, but they are an excellent church. They're behind Godfather's Pizza. They are amazing. The Assembly of God. And I've never even attended. And they've come and helped me and my family. And it's just, I don't know, I've received a lot more support and help in this community. So I think with the supports that you guys are talking about and laying down that kind of stuff and helping people, I think in the future we can eventually get to a point where homelessness is less of an issue in this county. And we just have to work together. And I think, you know, and I'm really thankful that I'm here, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Missy. Well, I want to end up by saying that this has been the Our Revolution Helena program. Our Revolution Helena is a group that was spun off from the Helena for Bernie Sanders group. I hadn't mentioned that before, but I want to end by quoting a little bit from the statement of purpose of Helena, Our Revolution Helena. It says, we're a progressive action group, independent. We're not part of a Democratic Party or Republican Party, working to ignite a true political revolution where people reclaim their democracy, where the ever-increasing income equality ends, where health care, housing, and food security is available to all. You can see that's why we need a revolution. But I want to end by saying Our Revolution Helena has not endorsed Bernie Sanders. But there's lots of discussion at the national level among the candidates for what we should do at the national level. I noticed that Donald Trump is cutting back on food stamps and food security. And so I think he's going in the wrong direction. But there is one candidate I want to quote, and I won't tell you who it is. You can guess for yourself. It says, for more than 40 years, we've had an affordable housing crisis in America that has only gotten worse. Over 18 million families are paying more than 50% of their income on housing, while last year alone, the 5 largest banks on Wall Street made a record-breaking $100 billion in profits. What should we do? End homelessness and ensure fair housing for all. End the housing crisis by investing $2.5 trillion to build nearly 10 million permanently affordable housing units. Make rent affordable by making Section 8 vouchers available to all eligible families without a wait list, and strengthening the Fair Housing Act. So you can probably guess who that is, and build new public housing. That, of course, is Bernie Sanders. And so we have not endorsed Bernie Sanders. We might, but there is a dialogue at the national level which is countering some of the backward thought among the people who are now in power. I want to thank everyone for being part of this, our Revolution Helena program. Our next meeting is at Plymouth Church, February 6th, Thursday at 7 p.m. We invite all of you. Thank you very much.